The Austrian School of Economics has a long tradition that dates back to the 19th century. And the label, like a lot of times in intellectual affairs, was given by their critics rather than by the advocates of the position. They just thought they were doing economics. There is online the Concise Encyclopedia of Economics, and I have an entry in there on the Austrian School of Economics which tends to de-emphasize personalities and de-emphasize this history, and instead focuses on 10 propositions that any student of economics would follow or think about that define the Austrian tradition. Well, the Austrian school is unique in its emphasis on knowledge and on the dynamic aspects of the market process. The market as a learning mechanism that focuses on knowledge, discovery, its utilization, and its transmissions. The number one thing is that Austrian economics should be viewed as just economics. Milton Friedman had this famous line where he said, there's no Chicago economics, there's no Austrian economics, there's just good economics and bad economics. Well, a lot of it has to do with sort of subtle method and methodological questions within economics. So the Austrians, if I go back to the methodological individualism point, the Austrians start the unit of analysis, the individual, the constraints that they face, and the choices that they make in the face of those constraints. Ludwig Fixell was very influential. Philip Wicksteed's work is also very important here. He was a British economist. Frank Knight's work, Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit, was very valuable. And of course, all the great classical economists. Hayek is, of course, the idea of invisible hand and spontaneous order is very influenced by Smith and Hume. I think that you could say that Smith and Hume were the big influences from the classics on Hayek. Whereas Mises is more the utilitarians, James Mill, not necessarily John Stuart Mill, but James Mill and Bentham, and then also Ricardo. Personally, I always loved the book Socialism. It was the first book I was exposed to of reading Mises, and I loved it. And I read Socialism and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But I do think that that is the best book. I think that it's important to read the book the correct way, which is to read, say, the first 100 pages about Mises and methodology, not with a focus on him in terms of grounding the science of economics in deriving certain true knowledge, but instead of viewing it as what are the conditions for studying human action, what are the ways in which we try to understand the human condition. The one book of Hayek, again, like in Mises's case, for the serious student of economics, I would recommend Individualism and Economic Order. Hayek, in that book, collects his main scientific essays in economics up to that time. And so that's the place to look at for Hayek's ideas. His main contribution was, along with his colleague Bill Baumol at NYU, though they worked separately, was the sort of rediscovery of the entrepreneur in economic theory and the role that the entrepreneur plays in a free society. He provides such an important part in the component of the economics of understanding a free society, which is why it makes sense for his work to be supported in this Liberty Fund series like this. I think that there's two reasons why. One of them is to get a better understanding of how markets actually function. And so one of the things that's very important to understand with Kirzner is that he emphasizes the idea of a framework and then economic activity within inside that framework. He explains to us how a free society, right, the framework of a free society, how the economics of that will work, and how entrepreneurs will guide decision making within the market so that individuals will realize the gains from trade and the gains from innovation. But actually what Kirzner explains is how it is that free individuals operating within a free economy will in fact generate peace and prosperity. And in doing that, he makes a major contribution to our understanding of the nature of a free society. There's really kind of a very obvious answer, which is that his classic work is Competition and Entrepreneurship. It was published in 1973, and I think it's still the greatest sort of work summarizing his position on things, and therefore I would recommend it to any reader, because part of what the book is explaining is how individuals compete on a variety of margins rather than just on one dimension, which is oftentimes picked up in our public policy discussions. The main contribution of competition entrepreneurship is this examination of the price adjustment process and the minimal conditions that need to be met in order to have a theory of dynamic price adjustment, which will lead to the market clearing. Kirzner in this book sort of goes through various different activities to first show the stability of a market economy to adjustment path towards equilibrium. I think Kirzner sought out to try to arbitrage between, as I said, kind of standard price theory a la George Stigler and the Austrian sort of approach of the market process as developed by Mises and Hayek in the late 1940s. I would recommend this book for all teachers of intermediate price theory, that they adopt it as a supplemental text or as a main text and try to teach from it. Well, I think the background of the economic point of view is fascinating in of itself, because it's actually was his doctoral dissertation written under the guidance of Ludwig von Mises, and it's an outgrowth of a question that Ludwig von Mises put to Kirzner. It's important to understand that one of Kirzner's great strengths is as a scholar, and he is a trained scholar, and I mean that in the sort of classical sense. And what Kirzner does is he goes through all of these various different arguments over the years. It's very important to stress that Israel Kirzner was writing books for specialists in the field of economics rather than writing books to the general audience. And this is one of the more daunting volumes for general readers. We have a downtown area in Fairfax. There's some restaurants that have been there forever, but a lot of restaurants go in, they're out, and they're another store, and they go in, they're out. That's the reshuffling and everything that goes on within a market economy, and that's what Kirzner is trying to get you to think about here, but in a very technical sense. So he's directing it at the theory points about the nature of capital maintenance and the role that the interest rate plays in the economy. We have been so successful at communicating to our peers the insights of the Austrian School of Economics that the Austrian school as such no longer serves a purpose, because mainline economics and mainstream economics would have, merged, and then that you would just say, oh, you do economics and political economy. And I think, again, we're in a situation where we're stressing that there may be macroeconomic phenomena, but there's only microeconomic explanations and solutions. And so we have to go back to the incentives that individuals face, the flow of information that they work with, and whether or not the feedback mechanism guides them in positive ways or in bad ways. Keep in mind the context of the times, which is the late 1970s. You have a stagflation going on. Reagan's not in office yet. This is the end of the Carter administration, where when Reagan was running, he referred to the misery index, where we had double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation. And so kids in college were concerned, just like the kids today, about what their economic future is. Austrian School, more than any other school, highlights that connection. And as a result, I think young people who are staring this down and have the sense to understand that these are going to be very turbulent times, the Austrian School allows you to frame that conversation better than any of the alternatives.